This chapter discusses the business cycle and the causes and effects of unemployment and inflation within that cycle, setting the stage for analytical presentations in later chapters. While hinting at various business cycle theories, the author stressed the general belief that changes in aggregate spending, especially durable goods and investment spending, are the immediate cause of economic instability. The chapter expands on the definition of unemployment by describing the various types of unemployment, frictional, structural, and cyclical, and addresses the problems involved in measuring unemployment and defining full employment. The section concludes by presenting the economic and non-economic costs of unemployment. The chapter then turns to inflation, describing demand pull and cost push inflation and differing redistributive effects of anticipated and unanticipated inflation. The chapter concludes with a discussion of the effects of inflation on output and employment. Keep in mind this will round out the major factors, GDP, unemployment, and inflation, that are used to determine if the three macroeconomic goals of economic growth are being met. And those are full employment, price stability. Material from this chapter is very likely to appear in several multiple choice questions on the exam, and it's frequently included as part of the free response question as well. And we're going to begin working on free response questions at the conclusion of this chapter. So let's get started. Business cycles are alternating increases and decreases in economic activity over time. Each business cycle consists of 4 phases. A peak is when business activity reaches a temporary maximum with full employment and near capacity output. A recession, or a contraction, it's another way to call it, is a decline in total output, income, employment, and trade lasting 6 months or more. And this is sometimes referred to as a depression if it lasts for a year. The trough is the bottom of the recession period, and the expansion is when output and employment are recovering and expanding toward full employment level. Figure 26.1 shows the business cycle. Economists distinguish 4 phases of that business cycle. The duration and strength of each phase may vary, and additionally, individual cycles vary in duration and intensity. You can see that the long-run trend is economic growth. The National Bureau of Economic Research, or NBER, is a nonprofit economic research organization. Within the NBER is the Business Cycle Dating Committee, whose job it is to declare the start and the end of recessions in the United States. They declared that the 2007 recession began in December of 2007 and ended in June of 2009. The chart shows U.S. recessions since 1950. Notice that not all of them are alike. Some last longer, some decline more. It is clear, however, that the United States has not experienced a recession like it has in the recent past since 1957 and 58, and none of which since 1950 has lasted as long as the most recent. The United States' long-run economic growth has been interrupted by periods of instability. Uneven growth has been the pattern, with inflation often accompanying rapid growth and declines in employment and output during periods of recession and depression. Economic shocks are unexpected events that individuals and firms may have trouble adjusting to. Prices can be inflexible downwards, which means that if total spending unexpectedly decreases and firms cannot lower prices, the firms will end up selling fewer units of output. The sticky prices result in slower sales, which will cause firms to cut back on production. This causes GDP to fall. Then employment will fall because of the reduced demand for output, and an economic contraction will occur. Inflexible prices are thought to be a major factor in preventing the economy from quickly adjusting to economic shocks. And these shocks are outlined on the next slide. The following economic shocks that can cause business cycles are listed here. Major innovations may trigger new investment and/or consumption spending, but these occur irregularly and unexpectedly and may contribute to the variability of economic activity. Examples include the computer and the internet. Changes in productivity may be a related cause. Unexpected changes in resource availability or unexpected changes in the rate of technological advances can affect productivity. As the monetary authorities print more money, an inflationary boom can occur. Printing less money than what people were expecting can trigger an output decline. As the economy adjusts to political events like peace treaties or war, economic strains can occur. Rapid asset price increases or decreases can spill over to the general economy and cause booms and busts. The recession of 2007 was led by excessive money, overvalued real estate, and unsustainable mortgage debt. Whatever the source of economic shocks, most economists agree that the immediate cause of the large majority of cyclical changes in the levels of real output and employment is unexpected changes in the level of total spending. Most agree that the level of aggregate spending is important, especially the changes in spending on capital goods and consumer durables. Recall that the definition of durable goods is a good with an expected life of 3 or more years. Spending on durable goods output is more volatile than non-durables and services because spending on non-durables or services often cannot be postponed. Also, durable goods items, which is a new automobile or a new washer and dryer, are generally more expensive for households to purchase, making durable goods more vulnerable in times of declining income and uncertainty for households. One of the major side effects of a recession or a contractionary period is unemployment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, an agency within the Department of Labor, does an unemployment rate survey every year, and it's calculated by asking 60,000 households nationwide. The population is divided into 3 groups. Group 1 consists of those under age 16 or institutionalized. In this country, if you're under 16, you're expected to be in school. If you're in an institution, such as a nursing home or prison, you obviously cannot present yourself to the labor market. Group 2 consists of those not in the labor force. Examples of individuals who are not in the labor force are full-time college students who are not working or stay-at-home parents and retirees. Group 3 consists of those age 16 and over who are willing and able to work and actively seeking work. Individuals who have demonstrated job search activity within the last 4 weeks. So Group 3 is the labor force. The labor force is simply described as those who are either employed or unemployed. To be counted as unemployed, you must be part of the labor force and actively seeking work. Figure 26.2 shows the labor force, employment, and unemployment in 2009. The labor force consists of persons 16 years of age or older and who are not in institutions and who are employed or unemployed but seeking employment. The unemployment rate is defined as the percentage of the labor force that is not employed and is found to be taking the number of those unemployed and dividing that number by the labor force. Remember to multiply the results by 100 so you can express this as a percentage. The Bureau of Labor Statistics rounds the number to 1 decimal point. Anybody that brings me the most up-to-date unemployment statistic will receive 5 bonus points on their next test. The measurement of unemployment does come with its criticisms. 2 factors cause the official unemployment rate to understate actual unemployment. The first is part-time workers who are counted as employed even if they really want to work full-time. And the second is discouraged workers who want a job but are not actively seeking one, and they're not counted as being part of the labor force, so they're not part of the unemployment statistic. If they're not seeking work, then they're officially in Group 2 as described in the previous slide. In fact, typically during periods of long contraction or deep recession, we'll see a slight decrease in unemployment due to the fact the population becomes discouraged and quits actively seeking work. They've given up. And right before recovery, we'll see a jump in unemployment. Within the unemployment category, there are different types of unemployment. In fact, 3 of the 4 types of unemployment are actually good for the economy. Frictional unemployment is regarded as somewhat desirable because it indicates that there is mobility as people change or seek jobs. Those searching for jobs or waiting to take jobs soon, and when I say waiting to take jobs soon, they voluntarily change jobs. They usually find jobs within a few months. So this is a short-term unemployment category. Frictional unemployment is usually a short-term type of unemployment as well. Structural unemployment occurs when certain skills become obsolete or geographic distribution of jobs change. This can be a long-term type of unemployment. Cyclical unemployment, though, is the bad one. It's caused by the recession phase of the business cycle. As firms respond to insufficient demand for their goods and services, output and employment are reduced. Extreme unemployment during the Great Depression reached as high as 25% in 1933 is an example of cyclical unemployment. It is sometimes not clear which type describes a person's unemployment circumstances, but we do know that between 4 and 6% is a healthy unemployment level, considering that you would have frictional, structural, and seasonal unemployment in those categories. And that takes us to full employment. Full employment does not mean zero unemployment, but it does mean that cyclical unemployment is zero. The full unemployment rate is equal to the total frictional and structural unemployment because these types of unemployment are always occurring and are a natural part of our economy. The full employment rate of unemployment is also referred to as the natural rate of unemployment. The natural rate is achieved when labor markets are in balance. The number of job seekers equals the number of job vacancies. The natural rate of unemployment is not fixed, but depends on the demographic makeup of the labor force and the laws and customs of the nation. With unemployment comes an economic cost. The GDP gap is the difference between potential and actual GDP, where potential GDP reflects the level of GDP associated with the natural rate of unemployment. Economist Arthur Okun quantified the relationship between unemployment and GDP as follows. For every 1% of unemployment above the natural rate, a negative GDP gap of about 2% occurs. This is known as Okun's law. This means that the country is producing below what could potentially be produced, given our resources and level of technology. You might liken this to operating inside of the production possibilities curve. This figure shows the actual and potential real GDP and the unemployment rate from 1989 to 2009. The differences between actual and potential GDP is what we call the GDP gap. A negative GDP gap measures the output the economy sacrifices when actual GDP falls short of potential GDP. A positive GDP gap indicates that actual GDP is above potential GDP. A high unemployment rate means a large GDP gap, and a low unemployment rate means a small or even positive GDP gap. Here's the unemployment rate for those same years. Flip back and forth and compare the unemployment rate with the GDP gap. And notice that they make the same movements during the same years. When the GDP gap is low and in the negative, we see a high unemployment rate. Unfortunately, with unemployment, it does not burden the same groups of people equally. There are usually unequal burdens of an unemployment. Rates are lower for white-collar workers. Teenagers typically have the highest unemployment rates since they have the least amount of experience. African Americans have higher unemployment rates than whites, and rates for males and females are comparable, though females currently have a lower unemployment rate. Less educated workers, on average, have higher unemployment rates than workers with more education. The long-term, which is 15 weeks or more, unemployment rate is much lower than the overall rate, although it has increased from 1.5% in 2007 to 4.7% in 2009. This is from the Economic Report of the President, Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the unemployment rates by demographic group for the full employment year of 2007 and the recession year of 2009. Along with economic costs, there are also non-economic costs. These can include loss of skills, loss of self-respect, family disintegration, social and political unrest, and increased poverty. Severe unemployment is socially catastrophic as it occurs at the individual level and spreads throughout society. This global perspective shows the unemployment rates in 5 industrialized nations from 1999 to 2009. Compared with Italy, France, and Germany, the United States has had a relatively low unemployment rate in recent years. We can really split this chapter into 2 separate sections, the first dealing with unemployment, the second dealing with inflation. Inflation is the side effect, typically, is the side effect of an expanding economy. Not all prices rise at the same rate, and some prices may stay constant while other prices fall. Reduced purchasing power means that each dollar of income will buy fewer items than before. So it's not how much money I have in my wallet, but how much that money can purchase. The CPI is the most commonly reported measure of inflation. The main index used to measure inflation is that consumer price index, and it's usually the measure the media reports. Anybody that brings me the most up-to-date consumer price index will receive 5 bonus points on their next test. The CPI-U is a measure of all urban consumers and thought to cover about 87% of our population's purchasing experiences. There are other price index reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and each is important to different groups. For example, there's the CPI-W, the CPI-C, and the PPI. To measure inflation, subtract last year's price index from this year's price index and divide by last year's index. Finally, multiply it by 100 to express it as a percentage. In this numerical example, using CPI data for 2007, there's a price index of 207.3, and 2006 has a price index of 201.6. You can calculate the inflation rate and find it is 2.8%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics rounds to the 10th decimal place. Rule of 70 permits quick calculation of the time it takes the price level to double. Divide 70 by the percentage of rate of inflation, and the result is the approximate number of years for the price level to double. Here the inflation rate is 2.8%, so divide 70 by 2.8 and you get the number 25. Therefore, it would take about 25 years for prices to double at the current rate of inflation for 2007. If the inflation rate is 7%, then it will take about 10 years for prices to double. Typically, the government will aim for approximately 2% inflation during a healthy economy. This global perspective shows the inflation rates of 5 different countries. You can see that for the United States, the inflation rate has been generally slightly higher than the other countries. This could also be a cause of our generally low unemployment levels. More people working means more people spending money, meaning higher prices. This is the inflation rate in the US from 1960 to 2010. Notice in the years where inflation is very low, generally, not always, but generally, this is during a period of contraction. And then inflation rates are typically high during periods of expansion. Of course, we know that there's an exception to that rule, and we call that stagflation, but more on that later. There are 2 types of inflation that occur during an expanding period in the business cycle. The first is demand pull inflation. It's a result of spending increasing faster than production. It's often described as too much spending chasing too few goods. The second type is cost push inflation. It occurs as prices rise because of a rise in per unit production costs. Unit cost equals total input cost divided by units of output. Previous chapter we covered this. In cost push inflation, prices rise but output falls. Rising costs reduce profits and reduce the amount of output producers are willing to supply at the existing price level. As a result, the economy's supply of goods and services declines and the price level rises. Supply shocks have been the major source of cost push inflation. These typically occur with dramatic increases in the price of raw materials or energy. It is difficult to distinguish between the causes of inflation, although cost push will die out in a recession if spending does not also rise. Because food, like oranges, and energy products, like gasoline, prices are subject to wide swings that can be temporary in nature. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also reports that the core CPI, which is the CPI less food and energy. The policymakers are mainly interested in whether the underlying core CPI is rising and how quickly. Based on that analysis, they may take measures to try to stop it. A common misconception is that high inflation is bad for everyone, but this is not true. Nominal income is the number of dollars received as wages, rent, interest, or profit. Real income refers to the purchasing power of your income, so how much can actually be purchased with your income. Anticipated inflation is much less harmful than unanticipated inflation. Real income can decrease even with an increase in nominal income if the inflation rate is higher than the increase in nominal income. So first, let's look at who's hurt by inflation. Harm from unanticipated inflation causes real incomes and wealth to be redistributed. Were the inflation to be expected, people could plan ahead for it. Those expecting inflation may be able to adjust their work or spending activities to avoid or lessen the effects. Unanticipated inflation has stronger impacts. Fixed income groups will be hurt because their real income suffers. Their nominal income does not rise with prices. Savers will be hurt by unanticipated inflation because interest rate returns may not cover the cost of inflation. Their savings will lose purchasing power. For example, if you have a savings account that gives you back 5%, but the inflation rate goes to 7%, you actually lose 2% of purchasing power on all money in your savings account. So you've lost money by saving. Creditors also can be harmed. Those are people that lend money. They can be harmed by unanticipated inflation because interest on payments received may be less than the inflation rate, and loan payments will have less purchasing power for the lender when the lender did not correctly anticipate and account for inflation. For example, if a bank gives you a loan at 5% interest, but the inflation rate is 7%, then the bank actually loses 2% when you pay them back. So the question is, who isn't hurt by inflation? Well, first of all, anybody that owes money would not be hurt by inflation, but actually helped through unanticipated inflation. The loan that they would pay back would not have the purchasing power as when they originally took it out. So essentially, they'd be paying back less purchasing power. Also, producers are helped because prices go up, producers are able to obtain more money. If inflation is anticipated, the effects of inflation may be less severe, since wage and pension contracts may have inflation clauses or cost of living adjustments built into them, and interest rates will be high enough to cover the cost of inflation to savers and lenders. Debtors or borrowers can be helped because the interest payments may be less than the inflation rate, so borrowers receive dear money and are paying back cheap dollars. If inflation is anticipated, individuals can plan ahead, mitigating the effects of inflation. Inflation premium is the amount that the interest rate is raised to cover effects of anticipated inflation, and the real interest rate is defined as the nominal rate minus the inflation premium. Figure 26.5 shows the inflation premium and the nominal and real interest rates. The inflation premium, the expected rate of inflation, gets built into the nominal interest rate. Here, the nominal interest rate of 11% comprises the real interest rate of 5% plus the inflation premium of 6%. In the past, deflation, which is the opposite of inflation, has been as much of a problem as inflation. For example, the 1930s depression was a period of declining prices and wages. The effects of deflation are the reverse of the inflation, so many families are simultaneously helped and hurt. If prices are declining, producers are going to be less willing and able to produce as much, therefore unemployment goes up. Prices might be lower, but less people are able to obtain the money. Many families are simultaneously helped and hurt by inflation because they're borrowers and earners and savers. Effects of inflation are arbitrary in terms of individuals who will benefit and individuals who are harmed, regardless of society's goals. The question is, does inflation affect output? Cost-push inflation, where resource prices rise unexpectedly, could cause both output and employment to decline, and real income falls. Mild inflation, which is measured around less than 3%, has uncertain effects. It may be a healthy byproduct of a prosperous economy, or may have an undesirable impact on real income. The two opposing views are that zero inflation is best, and another view is that mild inflation is best. But the big fear is hyperinflation. There is a danger of creeping inflation turning into hyperinflation, which can cause speculation, reckless spending, and more inflation. The Zimbabwe experience is interesting. The government of Zimbabwe faces a wide variety of difficult economic problems as it struggles with an unsustainable fiscal deficit in 2009, an overvalued official exchange rate, hyperinflation, and bare store shelves. Its 1998 to 2002 involvement in the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo drained hundreds of millions of dollars from the economy. The government's land reform program, characterized by chaos and violence, has badly damaged the commercial farming sector, the traditional source of exports and foreign exchange and the provider of 400,000 jobs, turning Zimbabwe into a net importer of food products. The EU and the US provide food aid on humanitarian grounds. Badly needed support from the IMF has been suspended because of the government's arrears and past loans and the government's unwillingness to enact reforms that would stabilize the economy. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe routinely prints money to fund the budget deficit, causing the official annual inflation rate to rise from 32% in '98 to 133% in 2004, 585% in 2005, past 1,000% in 2006, and 26,000% in November of 2007, and 11.2 million% in 2008. Meanwhile, the official exchange rate fell from approximately 1 Zimbabwean dollar per US dollar in 2003 to 30,000 per US dollar in September of 2007. This concludes chapter 26. Make sure you read the section that looks at the stock market and how the stock market affects the economy to close out this chapter.